Hello YouTube, today we will be discussing how the recent Canadian and Australian elections might have impacted the potential for a CANZUK alliance, that being the proposed economic, military, diplomatic alliance between Canada, Australia, New Zealand and the United Kingdom. And I've been a big advocate of this. I'm sure you've seen, if you're tuning into this one, some of my recent videos, and if you haven't, I've delved deeper into lots of different CANZUK topics in those, so go and check those out if you want some more context. Now, with the increasingly volatile global geopolitical situation, the US retreating from its global obligations and becoming a more hostile actor to even its closest allies, I've been keeping up fairly closely with the Canadian and Australian elections as they come at a really pivotal moment. And when I put out an appeal for some ideas of what you guys would like me to cover more about CANZUK or of the geopolitical issues, some people have messaged me saying, can I make a video on how these elections might then go on to impact CANZUK. So what I want to say here is, first of all, these are some of the most incredible electoral comeback victories that I have seen in recent times. The Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, who's just won an incredible comeback for the Canadian Liberal Party, who under Justin Trudeau was polling incredibly low, with the opposition leader, the Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, polling as if he was going to win a stunning victory. And then there was this incredible turnaround after Trudeau resigned. Mark Carney comes in, and Donald Trump is also elected in the United States and has incredibly hostile rhetoric towards Canada, which leads to a rejection of the Conservative Party, who Poilievre kind of styled himself as the Canadian Trump. He kind of appealed to that populism, and Canada has soundly rejected that style of politics. Now, in response to his victory, the UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer offered his congratulations to Carney in a post on X and pledged to strengthen Canada-UK ties. Addressing Carney directly, he said, quote, "I welcome your leadership on international issues, and I know we will continue to work closely on defence, security, trade and investment." And while it was the Canadian Conservative Party that actually tried to formally adopt CANZUK as a potential policy platform, this was actually quite late on in the election, and I think there is still some hope that this can happen under Mark Carney's leadership for a few reasons. Firstly, Carney has made a direct request that King Charles, the sovereign and head of state of Canada, travel over to deliver the speech from the throne to open Canada's new parliament, as he does in the UK. King Charles has accepted this invitation, and despite his ongoing cancer treatment, he will indeed fly across the Atlantic to deliver this speech, which will take place on the 27th of May. And notably, this news broke not long after Carney announced he would be meeting with US President Donald Trump, which has now happened, and Carney had this amazing moment where he stands up directly to Trump, saying Canada is never ever for sale. I'll play that clip for you now, and then we'll get on with the rest of the video. Here's the clip.
President, you have said Canada should become the 51st state.
Yeah. No. Well, I still believe that, but takes two to tango, right?
Well, if I may, as you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale.
That's true.
We're sitting in one right now, Buckingham Palace that you visited as well.
That's true.
And having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign last several months, it's not for sale, won't be for sale ever. But the opportunity is in the partnership and what we can build together.
So, of course, Trump has essentially betrayed the US-Canada relationship, adopted hostile rhetoric, repeatedly threatening to annex Canada as the 51st state, and called Canada's previous Prime Minister, Trudeau, the governor of said soon-to-be annexed state. Thus, the historic action of both Mark Carney in the White House there and the action of King Charles coming over, I believe, outlines Canada's defiance in the face of American hostility and reaffirms its commitment to the Commonwealth and particularly CANZUK family. Carney even says as much in his first news conference after becoming Prime Minister, saying the visit from the King, quote, "clearly underscores the sovereignty of our country because he is the ultimate head of state," and that, quote, "this historic honour matches the weight of our times."
We will have the privilege of welcoming His Majesty King Charles III, who will deliver Canada's speech from the throne on May 27th. Her Majesty the Queen will join this visit. This is an historic honor which matches the weight of our times.
Now, I cannot understate what a huge moment this is for the King to actually be there to formally open the 45th Parliament of Canada, the first time in decades a reigning monarch has done so, the last occurring in 1977 by Queen Elizabeth II. This is in many ways a kind of subtle diplomatic move, but has not really garnered much media attention over here in the UK. I'm not sure about Canada, but at the same time symbolises a great deal and a continuing coming together of these closest of nations. The Governor General of Canada, the effective monarch's representative in that country, she said, quote, "Wit and I," Wit being her husband, "will be delighted to welcome their Majesties King Charles III and Queen Camilla to Canada. Our Canadian identity is deeply rooted in our constitution, and this visit highlights the enduring relationship between Canada and the Crown. Now more than ever, we need to come together to ensure a future that builds on our shared global values of democracy, equality, and peace." And I think these statements, along with the fact that Carney ran his campaign on a largely anti-Trump platform and reiterated Canada will always remain sovereign and independent, having Charles assume his place at the centre of that parliamentary institution is a clear signal of Canada's unique political and national identity compared to the USA. And I think this is an incredibly important moment to discuss and does give me some hope that Canada will continue to turn and become ever more closer to its CANZUK allies. Now, of course, I'm not saying that CANZUK has to be an alliance based upon having King Charles as the head of state and based on kind of a monarchical system, the constitutional monarchy, but it does help that the king is the head of state of all four of the CANZUK nations, and we all have these historic ties. King Charles, for his part, over the past few months has made a number of subtle shows of support for Canada, from gifting items to Canadian military officials, sitting on Canadian-made chairs, wearing the uniform of the Admiral of the Fleet with Canadian regalia, and indeed the most significant, directly addressing his role as King of Canada in a speech to the Italian Parliament during a recent state visit to that country. And this upcoming trip to Canada is the latest move by the monarch, who is, as much as anything, highly respected by Trump for what it's worth. But this is this latest move, as I say, to reaffirm his commitment to Canada. Now, the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has also won re-election in a landslide, breaking the decades-long incumbency curse in Australian politics. And the reversal in the polls there, while not quite as remarkable and unprecedented as in Canada's election, is still very, very impressive and shows a clear wariness at the, rightly or wrongly, perceived populism of the opposition leader Peter Dutton and paranoia over how similar he was to Donald Trump. In fact, in both the Canadian and Australian elections, both of the opposition leaders, Dutton and Poilievre in Canada, didn't even win their own seats, showing quite an emphatic rejection of their parties with huge swings away. Now, with the context and brief overview aside, I wanted to go over what these recent elections could mean for the future of the CANZUK idea, and I've already discussed briefly how Canada is kind of turning more away from the United States and towards its CANZUK allies, and this is something I've mentioned in previous videos as well, the ability that CANZUK would provide in diversifying away from any one major power that would allow us to have a lot more freedom in trade and how we conduct ourselves on the international stage. Now, as I've also mentioned in some videos, and actually one of the main reasons for me myself getting back into the CANZUK campaign that I first interacted with some years ago, this actual election of Donald Trump back to the White House and his subsequent actions in dragging the United States away from any sense of civilized dialogue, bringing a hostile stance towards allies, retreating America into isolationism and protectionism, and reneging on its responsibilities not only as global hegemon but also as the leader of the free world. It is in this context that I think each of the CANZUK countries needs to diversify away from the US, and this alliance is a perfect way of doing so, growing closer to countries with such similar worldviews and with the same head of state, culture and history, as well as the same political institutions under the Westminster parliamentary system. And the voters in Australia and Canada have sounded the same bell. They have rejected the populist, or populist-coded at least, politicians who they viewed as being the most similar to Donald Trump in their respective countries, and thus essentially stuck up a massive middle finger to the man sat in the White House. This means that in Canada and Australia, they have leaders that have built their platforms upon being anti-Trump, with Carney, as I say, being specifically focused on Canada's sovereignty and maintaining their political capital with voters rests upon the rejection of the current US worldview and hopefully therefore closer relations with CANZUK nations instead. They have a huge public mandate to do so. CANZUK International, one of the foremost groups campaigning for a CANZUK union, themselves have already written an article on how Carney in Canada is uniquely positioned to champion CANZUK. They say in that article, quote, "His tenure steering the Bank of England through Brexit and the Bank of Canada through the 2008 financial crisis equips him with credibility and a deep understanding of the economic and political ties binding CANZUK nations. His time in the UK fostered strong relationships with British policymakers, while his Canadian roots ensure alignment with Canada's interests. The Liberal leader's focus on reducing Canada's economic reliance on the US also dovetails with CANZUK's aim of fostering alternative trade and security networks. In his victory speech, Carney outlined a vision for Canada that resonates with CANZUK principles, speaking of building an independent future for our great country and forging new international relationships in a changed global order. By prioritizing partnerships with nations sharing Canada's democratic values, Carney is well positioned to advocate for CANZUK's core aims: enhanced trade, mobility and defense cooperation. As Carney navigates a complex geopolitical landscape, his leadership could cement CANZUK as a cornerstone of Canada's international strategy, fostering shared prosperity and security." I think that is really well written, and CANZUK International also states that they are optimistic about the possibilities under Carney's leadership and urge their supporters to engage policymakers to advocate for CANZUK's inclusion in Canada's foreign policy agenda. And I do think personally the very fact that a political party, the Liberals in Canada, have been able to completely change their electoral fortunes with a new leader and an anti-Trump Canada strong message proves that Canadians want a change. They don't trust the US anymore, and I think if more people knew about the opportunity of CANZUK, they would support it. And that's why in each of my videos now I encourage people, write to your local representative, email or write a letter, etc., and sign those petitions. The UK's petition for CANZUK is now at over 6,500 signatures, and at 10,000 the government will formally respond. So make sure you go and sign that. Just type CANZUK petition into Google and the official Parliament website should show up with, quote, "The UK should start talks on forming a CANZUK union petition." That's the name of the petition. I believe there are equivalents in Canada definitely, and most likely Australia and New Zealand as well. And if there isn't, go and create one. Spread the words, and we need grassroots action to get this off the ground. So that covers the Canadian election mostly, and let me know if there's anything else I've missed. Of course, I'm over here in the UK and I've probably not caught up on all the nuances of this Canadian election. So if you are Canadian, please let me know in the comments down below if I have missed anything, and let me know your general thoughts on my analysis as well. Turning to Australia, the anti-populist, anti-Trumpist story continues here really. It really does show, I think, how closely aligned the people of our countries are. See what's going on in the United States, how full of hate it is, and how soundly rejected it. With three governments in Canada, Australia and the UK who are pretty aligned politically, whether you agree with their views or not, it makes forging closer relationships between their political leaders easier, building upon the foundation that Carney especially started about a month ago by diversifying away from the United States. The UK's Prime Minister Starmer released a statement to returning Australian PM Albanese by congratulating him and saying how the UK and Australia are as close as ever, showing that long-distance relationships can be the strongest, and going on to talk about working closely on shared values and defence collaboration. Canada is also expanding its defence partnerships with Australia, now buying Australian-made over-the-horizon radar systems called Dawn, and Australia will soon begin production of a new armed autonomous drone rumoured to be utilising Canadian-made engines. For their part, the UK and New Zealand also agreed to strengthen their defence and economic partnerships just recently with joint initiatives and a recommitment to their 2015 defence collaboration, with Starmer saying, "Our work exemplifies the power of nations with shared values uniting for security and prosperity." And I think if we can continue to build these partnerships between all four nations, we can really get this going. On top of that, with their aligned governments, I think the first major step that could be taken is a CANZUK summit. I've seen people on Reddit also calling for this in the CANZUK subreddit, where we can come together in one location, sit down and have serious discussions together about this proposal between our political leadership. Trade-wise, for example, building upon existing relationships would be easy as well. All our nations of the CPTPP, for example, with the UK joining in 2023, the latest to do so. The building blocks are already there. We just need to push to build higher. And that's where I think I'll wrap up this video. I have to say, on a personal note, while my views do not really skew that left wing at all, I was still gladdened to see populism and pseudo-Trumpism completely fail in Australia and Canada. I think the US at the moment has a toxic, hateful political scene, and I am glad as countries we have risen above that. But anyway, thank you very much for watching this video. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed. If you want to support me further, you can now become a channel member with lots of exclusive perks there, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.